All right, welcome to all. It is my great pleasure to open this 2017 Geneva Challenge award ceremony. And I would like to congratulate the three teams that are with us tonight. I would like also first to express my deep gratitude to the person without whom we wouldn't be gathered here tonight. That person is Ambassador Jenő Stelin, who not only yes, who not only had the idea of this contest, shame to us academics, but was absolutely instrumental in helping us to shape its design, organization, and also funding. So it is really a person who merits, who deserves our warmest applause. Thank you so much, Jenő. I also would like to thank Mr. Kofi Annan, an alumnus and a long-standing friend of the Graduate Institute, to give us his warm presence tonight. It's always such a pleasure to have you here at the Graduate Institute. It's unfortunate that your wife, Nan, could not be with us tonight, but we really appreciate that you have come for this award ceremony tonight. I would like to introduce now our distinguished speaker. I think that on the challenge of employment, nobody is better placed than Mrs. Helen Clark to speak about this topic. Coming from academia, Mrs. Clark went quickly, and this is a proof of cleverness, into politics, and where she was for several decades deputy minister and then prime minister of New Zealand from 1999 to 2008. Then became administrator of the United Nations Development Program for till this year, a few months ago. And it is with her deep knowledge of both national conditions and international challenges that she will give us an aperçu of the challenges that employment represents for the youth and all the people, in fact, of this planet. So thank you so much.
His Excellency Kofi Annan, Michael Moller, Head of United Nations in Geneva, many distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, including the contestants who we're going to hear from shortly. And thank you so much for inviting me to come to the awards ceremony tonight at this prestigious Graduate Institute of International and Development Studies. So tonight the Institute will honour the winners of this year's challenge on addressing many facets of employment. And we're going to hear about the proposals they make shortly. In keeping with the theme of the challenge, I titled my address "The Importance of Decent Work for Sustainable Development, Challenges and Prospects." I do speak, as the introduction said, as a former New Zealand Prime Minister, and in that time I did lead a government which succeeded in maintaining rather low unemployment levels for a number of years, mostly at around 3.5%, which in Western economies is pretty much considered what is called the clearance level. But I also speak, obviously, as a former administrator of the UN Development Programme, for which lifting people out of poverty and providing opportunity for decent work and livelihoods was a top priority. I see it as a basic human right to have decent work, which is both safe and properly remunerated. Many people in our world are currently denied that right. Now, the new global agenda, the 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, has put jobs to the fore, and we have the SDG 8 calling for the promotion of, quote, sustained, inclusive and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment and decent work for all. And we're going to need the world's very best minds applied to meeting that aspiration, hence the importance of the challenge which the Graduate Institute has set in this year's contest. Indeed, one of the biggest hurdles to get over in achieving the Sustainable Development Agenda will be the jobs deficit. So let me now address why jobs and decent work matter, the scale of the task of creating enough work for all, and what might be done to meet SDG 8 in the very fast-changing world of work. So on why work matters. Work of one kind or another has a central place in the lives of most of us, as we tend to define ourselves by what we do. What is often the first question after we've introduced ourselves? We say, "What do you do?" And I remember asking that question many years ago to someone in New Zealand at a meeting on unemployment, and this person said to me, "Well, I'm in the army." I said, "Oh, that's interesting. What part of the army?" And he said, "The army of the unemployed." And that always registered with me, the loss of dignity of not being able to say what you did. So being without work means having less income or no income at all in some societies, and joblessness impacts fundamentally on human dignity. Put simply then, to have decent work is to support human dignity, to provide economic security, and to enable people to participate in society. The many functions that work play in our lives and our societies make it central to human development. And UNDP titled its 2015 Global Human Development Report simply Work for Human Development. And it looked at how decent work contributes to human development, how what I will call indecent work detracts from human development, and how we could expand the opportunities for decent work. So then come to the scale of the current jobs deficit. Well, we very much rely on International Labour Organization forecasts, and they expect unemployment to rise by 3.4 million people this year, to a total of over 200 million, around 5.8% of the global workforce. ILO forecasts a further rise by 2.7 million next year. It also classifies more than 42% of total employment currently as vulnerable employment. And in developing countries, that figure rises to around 80% of all work. Let me repeat that, 80% of all work is considered to be vulnerable employment in developing countries. The UN then describes such employment as being less likely to involve formal work arrangements and therefore less likely to offer decent working conditions. Vulnerable work could also include employment where even those in formal work are not given proper protection in law and regulation. And we can all think of developed country examples where that is true too. A point that's made very strongly in the Global Human Development Report on work is that there is no automatic link between work and human development. Whether work is good for human development or not depends entirely on its quality. So, if one is working without adequate safety, without rights, without the means to uphold one's rights in law, and without adequate social protection in the event of losing one's job, life becomes very precarious. At the extreme end of the vulnerability are the 21 million people estimated to be in forced labour, including people who are trafficked, including for sex work, a problem far from unknown in Europe today, And that category also includes the 168 million child labourers worldwide. There is a companion Sustainable Development Goal to the one on jobs, and it's Sustainable Development Goal 10 around reducing inequalities. The basic premise is that no one should be left behind in development. Yet we see so many left behind in many societies, including through discrimination on the basis of gender, age, ethnicity and disability. Unemployment or less opportunity in employment are very important components of that discrimination. To achieve full employment, growth would need to be much more inclusive. Jobs and livelihoods for all would need to be an explicit policy target. They won't just materialise without the right policy settings. Now let me say a word on the particular challenges in the world of work for women and for young people. Women are particularly disadvantaged in the world of work, and I make the following points drawn from the UNDP Human Development Report. 3 of every 4 hours unpaid work in our world are done by women. On the other hand, men do 2 of every 3 hours of paid work. The pressures on women will increase as populations age, as it is women who do most of the unpaid elder care work. Then if we look at those in paid work, women are, on average, paid less, on average earning 24% less than do men worldwide. Women hold only around 1/5 of the senior leadership positions globally. Almost 1/3 of businesses have no women at all in their senior management. Most cabinets of ministers have few women, if any, and women make up only 23.6% of the world's parliamentarians. All of that contributes to issues which women need addressed being less likely to have priority. The old saying, out of sight, out of mind, surely applies. So what to do? Many things, but the call of the UNDP report was for governments to absolutely ensure equal pay for women, equal pay for equal work of equal value, to ensure paid parental leave for women and men when babies are born, and to tackle the harassment and the social norms which exclude many women from paid work. Now then there are the issues for youth, and youth unemployment continues to rise, currently standing at over 13% globally, compared to 5.8% for people of all ages. Now the 13% is an average. Clearly we know of countries where youth unemployment is 20%, 25%, 30%, a nightmare. And to make a significant dent in youth unemployment, the ILO Director General Guy Ryder has said that 475 million more jobs must be created in the decade from 2016, as around 40 million youth are entering the workforce anew each year. Today's cohort of adolescents and youth stands at around 1.8 billion people, most of whom live in developing countries. Often we hear talk of the demographic dividend, which can accrue to countries with large young populations. And I believe that dividend can be realised if countries invest in their youth, create opportunities for them, and ensure that their voices can be expressed and heard. But I do believe the opposite is also true, that without that investment, opportunity and inclusion, youth may become alienated and disengaged and, of course, experience poverty. That is not a recipe for peaceful and cohesive societies. When the uprisings began in the Arab States region in late 2010, youth were a very powerful force behind them. And there was an economic base to that discontent. The region had the highest youth unemployment in the world at 27%, which was twice the global rate at the time. The unemployment was highest among the educated youth. For example, over a third of Egypt's young university graduates were unemployed. And there has also been a very serious mismatch in the region between the education provided and what the labour market had to offer. So when you combine the economic issues with the lack of civic space that there was in which to express discontent about what was happening, and also about the nature of the governance, then the proverbial single spark did light the prairie fire. And I guess the rest is history. Elsewhere, in developed and developing countries, a number of youth without hope will find their niche in organised crime and or in its terrorist variant. We see that too. But I believe it need not be this way. If good policies are in place, if development is supported, and if governance is inclusive and fair, that also being another goal of the Sustainable Development Agenda. Let me now come to facing up to the disruption that we're seeing in the world of work in order to create opportunity for all. The world of work is changing exceptionally quickly with the deepening globalisation and the accelerating impact of new technologies tending to run side by side. And countries are going to need very smart public policy and action, together with big partnerships, to maintain high levels of unemployment through these disruptive times. I remember back in 2004 coming at Juan Somavia's invitation to speak at the launch of the then latest ILO report on the social impacts of globalisation. And all those years ago, that report was asserting that the way in which globalisation had proceeded had created a world which was fit for the movement of investment and corporations, but that far too few countries had put in place the policies which were needed to support people to navigate through the disruptive impacts of that. So, as we know, many communities saw their labour-intensive jobs move away without other jobs being created to substitute for them. Some communities never recovered from those shocks. And I do believe the populist backlash we have seen in a number of recent elections in the Western world has given voice to some of those long-running concerns. Of course, more recent analysis suggests that most manufacturing jobs lost in the United States in the first decade of this century were lost not because of borders open to trade, but because of technological change. But from the perspective of the individual who's lost their job, the impact is the same, isn't it? Their job disappeared, it may not have been replaced, or if replaced, may have been at a lower wage level. That too is quite a common experience. But whatever the cause of disruption, of job displacement, I do think it needs a very proactive policy response. And that should include upskilling and access to lifelong education, support for research and development so that societies can harness innovation and diversify their economies. It should include strong social protection for those who are falling through the various cracks of the labour market, and it should include support for relocation to where opportunities are if people can move. But the question on the minds of many is, will the current round of technological disruption be more disruptive than in previous eras? And of course, with each round of technological change, there have been concerns about where will the jobs of the future come from. To date, humanity has proved to be remarkably good at inventing new jobs, from the time the hand loom was replaced by the factory machine, right through to the fully fledged computer age. And people do work today which would have seemed like science fiction speculation even a couple of decades ago. Now, this fourth industrial revolution, the Klaus Schwab term, is upon us, with its fusion of technologies across what the World Economic Forum describes as the physical, the digital, and the biological spheres. We are living in this era of the virtual company where Uber owns no cars, where Google and Facebook provide no content and Airbnb provides no accommodation. Their power lies in controlling networks and platforms. But further steps take us into the realm of artificial intelligence, to the driverless car, to the capacity of a robot to pass the university exams and do much else besides. So it is not just manual and clerical skills jobs which are at risk at this point. And then there's another form of disruption in the world of work too, and that is the need to tackle climate change. That requires significant adjustment for all economies. Clearly, jobs are being lost, more will be lost as some old and polluting sectors decline, coal mining being an obvious example. Conversely, there are opportunities, and people need to be facilitated to move from one to another. And the area of green energy generation is growing fast, and increasing energy efficiency creates more work, etc. So, does society have the capacity to manage the transitions required in this disruptive era and to reinvent itself to provide enough work and opportunity for everyone? I don't think we know the answer to that right now, but I do believe there is a very big role for active public policy, including in the following areas. It will be more vital than ever to invest in education, in skills and innovation in order to give people the very best chance of being able to compete in a new kind of workforce. I think that skills for entrepreneurship, including social entrepreneurship, need to be nurtured, as more people are likely to have to create their own jobs. We know there are many useful tasks which could be done in society if we could find the means to pay for them, not least support for the elderly, those with disabilities, not least what could be done with recreation, with conservation efforts, with other community facilities and services. And we will need to plan around people having more leisure time in the future. If we have traditionally defined ourselves by what we do, how will we define ourselves in a world where fewer may have conventional work, and what issues might arise from that? And our social protection systems will need to be redesigned. Now, on that point, the prospect of a future in which there is less conventional paid work is stimulating a lot of discussion on how to distribute wealth within societies more fairly, including on whether to design what is called a universal basic income. That could take a number of forms, but the basic principle would be that no person in a society should have income under a given level, and that that level could be reached or exceeded entirely through paid work or by a mixture of work and cash transfer, or be reached by cash transfer alone. So, to draw to a conclusion, today's job deficit is real, it's very challenging, and there is significant inequity in our labour markets, not least that which affects women and youth. Work does matter, both for sustenance and for human dignity. Without decent work for all, we can't achieve the goals of the new global agenda for sustainable development. We do have very challenging disruption in the labour market, including those forms of disruption associated with the Fourth Industrial Revolution, ongoing and deepening globalisation, and climate change. Both the existing jobs deficits and the discrimination to be overcome, and the transitions which are needed from the old economies to the new, require active public policy. And I would also submit a commitment to social dialogue in order to realise the goal of full and productive employment and decent work for all, which the new global agenda exhorts us to meet. Thank you.
many thanks for this broad, precise and stimulating presentation of the challenges and opportunities posed by employment in this present world. So we have a bit of time for a round or two of questions. So please, micros are somewhere over there. So give your name and ask questions. Who wants to start? Okay.
Hi, Mrs. Clark. My name is Roman. I'm a current student here. I'm very interested in the point you made about empowering youth. And my question to you is, how do you think the youth can be politically engaged? Thank you.
Well, I think quite a lot of societies in our world aren't very used to listening to young people. And young people feel, not really part of, if you like, having input into decisions which impact on their lives. I think that needs to change very, very quickly because youth are such a large cohort. They face many challenges. The world is very volatile. That's not going to change anytime soon. So the sooner that countries get on board with including youth and their perspectives and making it possible for them to contribute, the better. My country has just seen a 37-year-old woman form a government, so maybe it has some examples to offer. Of course, very exciting to see the President of France elected under the age of 40 and young and dynamic leaders like Trudeau. And I think these trends also encourage people to participate. If you walk halfway towards youth, youth will walk the other way as well. But it's not just about voice and participation, it's also about being able to contribute your talents. And as I said at the beginning of my speech, one of the ways we contribute is also through what we do. And we have to provide an environment where it's possible for youth to be able to work, to be able to fully contribute their talents.
Thanks, Mrs. Clark. You talked about both the dignity of work, but also the idea of universal basic income. And they seem to be somewhat opposed, the idea that you can have an income without work and maintain dignity. Do you have a view on whether universal basic income is something that you see prospering and working?
I do have a view about the form of universal basic income. I think it is too challenging. And I've been a politician most of my life, so I have some idea of what you can sell and what you can't. So in my country, it would be very hard to sell the notion that we pay to absolutely everybody this amount of income, right? Because the tax clawback to do that, tax rates would have to be very high to do that. So I don't think that's feasible for my society, and I submit for quite a lot of others where tax rates would become a huge issue. But what I think, as I said in my address, is that it's very important to establish what the level of income is that is necessary for people to have a decent life, and then look at how that income will be constructed. Now, I give my own country as an example. With its large primary production base, it has parts of the year when there's a lot of work and other parts when there's none at all. And what you need to be able to have is to say, well, how would you, get recognition for, say, the 7 months of the year of hard work that you do in the meatworks or whatever? How do you make up the other 5 months? And you shouldn't be sort of dragged down to a low average. So it's a question of playing around with the design of that. Now, also, as I said, there are so many things that people could usefully do in our societies, which we haven't found ways of paying for. So if the job market isn't creating enough opportunity, then again, if we design the sort of the public payment system so that it enables people to do those things, which would be very useful to have done, that would be a contribution and would enable people to say what they did. There would be dignity with it. I never think there's much dignity for the able-bodied who want to do things to simply receive a cash payment. People actually do want to do something. So we're going to have to be very creative about that. But I haven't given up on the job market yet. As I say, the jury is out as to whether we are in a completely different era from any other industrial revolution and will not see our ingenuity create more work. I mean, you think back 15 years, who would have thought of what we could do with a smartphone today? I mean, we have been incredibly clever at finding new things to do. But we'll need a combination of that and very active public policy responses to get through this.
Let's take a last question.
Hello, ma'am. My name is Hemant. It's an honor to hear you. Ma'am, what are your views on the measures that the governments of the emerging nations that should be taken to maybe work more towards unemployment?
Well, I think the world we're entering is quite challenging, particularly for countries which still have a very large agrarian base, where the countryside will have to shed people because it simply cannot absorb those people, but where the sort of traditional route to development, which was through industrialisation, manufacturing, factory jobs, that route is closing off with what is happening with capital investment and technology, robotics, etc. To give you an example, when I was in Laos a few months ago, still with UNDP, I met people there who are working with UNDP on advising the Lao government on jobs and strategy. And the consultant made the point to me, he said, I'd be rather working on this here in Laos now than, say, in Vietnam. And I said, why? And he said, well, Vietnam has gone sort of down that Asian tiger road where it becomes the latest low labour cost destination for manufacturing. But with what is happening in manufacturing, this isn't going to be a route that others can follow. For countries that are trying to develop away from the agrarian base, find what the jobs and the new economy will be, there's not that easy option. But all I can say is education, 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 enabling people to have the most flexible range of skills that they have, providing the access for lifelong learning. These are incredibly important things for people being able to move with whatever change comes along. And I think that's a message really for economies at every level of development.
It's an honor and a pleasure to have you with us tonight, and I thank you many times.
Thank you.
So let me call to the podium Ambassador Stelin, who is going to announce us that tonight there is no prize awarded.
You have to wait a little bit. Mrs. Clark, Mr. Kofi Annan, Mr. Michael Muller, Mr. Ruth Dreyfus, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Let me first express my heartfelt thanks to you, Mrs. Clark, one of the 20 most influential women in the world, according to a Forbes magazine edition. We couldn't have found a better person to give us a talk about the challenges of employment, and we have not been disappointed. Many thanks for sharing your views on the challenges and the importance of decent work. Dear friends, we are in the 4th year of this contest, and we are rather impressed ourselves by its success. This year we had 135 teams from around the world participating, in other words, 524 students have made a huge effort to write a paper analyzing a specific topic related to employment and proposing innovative and pragmatic solutions on how to tackle it and thereby foster social and economic development. This is much more than we had expected 4 years ago. And it is an obligation for us to react because we don't take success for granted. What we have decided is, first, to invite an additional 3 teams to come to Geneva, even if they will not get a financial reward for their effort, in contrast to the first group of 3. We hope that visiting Geneva will be worthwhile, profitable, and beneficial to you. They are with us here tonight, and I would like to greet them very warmly. They are a group of students from India, Belarus, Germany, Poland, working on empowering workers in Uberized markets using e-union. Another group from Colombia, Macedonia, and the United States on employment challenges faced by female ex-combatants. And the third group from India and Canada on information asymmetrics as a reason for unemployment and what to do about it. Second, we have decided to organize a workshop for the 6 teams that are interested in implementing their projects. It will take place tomorrow and should help them, I hope, to learn how best to network, introduce and sell their project, raise funds, and move from idea to action. Third, an additional great news is the beginning of a partnership with UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network Youth. SDSN Youth is the global youth chapter of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network, launched in 2012 by former Secretary General Ban Ki-moon. With a global team of over 100 students and young professionals and a membership base of 300 plus organizations, SDSN Youth's mission is to empower youth globally to create sustainable development solutions and be the driving force for the 2030 agenda. SDSN Youth creates platforms for young people to connect, collaborate, and integrate their ideas and perspectives into national and regional pathways for implementation of the SDGs. In January of this year, SDSN Youth launched the Youth Solutions Report platform to address the difficulties that young SDG innovators face in securing funding, building capacity, communication, and their experience ultimately to scale their efforts. SDSN Youth facilitates through its network of institutional partners, experts, private companies, and media outlets, the dissemination of promising youth-led solutions, giving them additional fora to showcase their work and opportunities to draw interest from potential supporters. DSN Youth is directed by Jeffrey Sachs. One of its project leaders, Dario Piselli, happens to be working for a PhD at the Graduate Institute, and he has helped us to connect with SDN youth. Thank you, Dario. A direct and important result of this cooperation, and that is important, is the inclusion of our 3 finalists and our 3 semi-finalist teams on the SDSN platform, which I think is great. And it comes even better. SCSN has decided to select among the 129 Geneva Challenge teams not represented in Geneva today 3 additional projects they consider of particular interest. These are, think it a new approach to leveraging the global digital economy to combat unemployment in North Africa by a group of students with Tunisian, German, Kenyan, Somali, Turkish, and Ecuadorian background. Solar N3E, proposing a solar network for energy, education, and employment by students with US and Filipino background, and Vunakunye, a platform that will help South African smallholder farmers access markets and create jobs across the agricultural value chain by a group of students from South Africa and Kenya. The project of these 3 teams will also be put on the SDSN platform, and they will thus also be able to benefit from its network of partners and the publicity associated with it. I'm particularly gratified by this development, since there are now 9 teams, and not only 3, as originally planned, teams that in one way or another will be benefiting from their participation in the Geneva Challenge competition. However, there are challenges left. One is related to the fortunate fact that a great many submissions come from Asian, African, Latin American universities. Obviously, to compete with students from European and North American universities like Harvard, Columbia, Oxford, not to mention the Graduate Institute, is for teams from developing countries, universities, not easy. Of course, many Geneva Challenge participants, while studying in a Western university, do have a developing country nationality, and we will see that soon. Yet, we don't want the chances of being successful for students from developing countries limited to those studying in the West. Students from other universities shouldn't be discouraged from participating in the global effort about how to achieve the SDGs if their contribution is innovative, creative, and practical. How to react, how to achieve that without lowering the academic standard of the competition is something we have to think about. Related to that is a second challenge we face. It's a growing number of participants that have excellent academic background, backed up by more than just 1 degree, sometimes even a first master degree, and many of them have long practical experience in addition. This is great without question, yet again, those participants do have, of course, a competitive advantage compared to traditional master students. In short, our problem is not underqualification of some students. Our problem is overqualification of some other students. These are, of course, problems that are nice to have. Nonetheless, these are problems we have to solve. And I'm sure we will solve these nice problems, no doubt. And with that, I now would like to give the floor to the 3 top-rated teams to present their submissions and projects. May I ask the first group, and I think you know which is the first group, to present your project to come on the floor.
Stand right next to me. Or should I use the mic? Can I use the mic? Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, Mr. Kofi Annan, Mrs. Clark. Thank you very much for the opportunity to present our project. Thanks in particular to the Graduate Institute for organizing the competition and for all the people who worked behind the scenes to make this event possible. In particular, we give thanks to Lina Menga, who is our direct point of contact. And I'm certain that she's worked tirelessly to make this event go off seamlessly. But let me introduce my team, Mvuzo. To my right, I have Ketumetso Kabelo Mari, Fuad Kuvadia, and Poitumelo Dikoko. We are a group of young South Africans studying at the Universities of Oxford and Cape Town who are interested in the problem of youth unemployment. Youth unemployment in South Africa is one of our largest development issues. 1 in 3 South Africans who are looking for work can't find work, and 1 in 2 young South Africans who want to work are currently without it. So the question is, how do we address what is seemingly an intractable problem? Our research led us to the conclusion that there were both structural and microeconomic efficiency-based issues underpinning this problem. The structural issues relate to the nature of the South African economy. We simply aren't growing at a large rate, fast enough to absorb the entrance into the labor market. But the way that we're growing as well is creating a skills mismatch in terms of the skills base of the labor force currently and the skills that are demanded by the system. Second structural factor is our education system. Unfortunately for us, the public education system doesn't produce high school graduates who are competitive in international maths and science scores. So it becomes challenging to create economic growth that can absorb the lower semi-skilled nature of the new job entrants. But then there are other issues. There are other issues related to the recruitment process and efficiencies that we think that we could better, that we could improve upon. And in 3 fundamental areas. Search costs. We found that for an average young unemployed South African, the job search process was one which was unnecessarily long, expensive, and arduous, especially in a context where many young, poor South Africans who are unemployed are living far from where jobs actually are, and telecommunication costs are extremely high as well. The second issue was that we found that there was the fundamental skills mismatch that I alluded to earlier between the nature of the skills had by the job market entrants and participants and the way in which the South African economy was growing and demanding young employees. And then the third one was the way in which employers themselves were choosing to discriminate between prospective employees and decide on who to hire and who to not, and who not to hire. Many of them, due to a mistrust of the public education system, were imposing fairly arbitrary requirements for new entrants, such as having higher secondary education qualifications that had very little to do with the job at hand. So to combat those 3, what we see as microeconomic efficiency-related issues, we came up with our project Umvuzo, a skill-centered mobile learning solution for the South African labor market. What Umvuzo is essentially is a web application and a smartphone application that provides certain features for both job seekers and employers. For job seekers, it does a number of things. The first is to give them the opportunity to acquire skills that are in demand by employers and to improve on their job search strategies. It allows them to be rewarded in tangible ways, ways that many evaluations in the South African context have shown to improve search efficacy. And it is also a way for them to be able to apply directly to jobs without having to incur the very large search costs. On the employer end, and this is where we think our true innovation comes in, what we do is we are able to transform the user journeys and experiences and skills training trajectories of our job seekers into meaningful data that employers on the other end of our process can use to make better informed hiring decisions. So as a job seeker uses the app, learns new skills, metrics such as their aptitude, their diligence, their attention to detail, and others that would otherwise be unrevealed by their paper-based applications suddenly become patent. We think that offering to employers supports us in our revenue model as it allows us to sell that kind of data on a subscription basis to employers. What our application also offers employers the opportunity to do is to contribute directly into the way that we construct our skills modules. Like we said, a fundamental element of our project is to create modules that are as precisely as possible linked to the nature of work that prospective employees would be performing on the job. So it's integral to our process and to our thinking, to our network effect, and having employers involved in the process of curating, designing, and constructing our skills modules. That, together with the fact that they're able to load vacancies and receive applications on the app, creates what we think is a valuable addition to any prospective South African employers' recruitment tools. At the end of the day, what we envision Umvuzo as is a way of reigniting what is a fairly hopeless situation for many young unemployed South Africans. Many South Africans that we know, who are our friends, our family, are trapped in that situation of desperately wanting to work but not having the means to search for and not having the experience and skills to acquire those new job opportunities. We hope to introduce Umvuzo as a way of directly addressing that issue and once again bringing hope to the picture.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're the team from Columbia University. We're very honored to be here with our honorable guests and the rest of you as well. We want to extend our thanks, similar to the first team, to the Institute and the people who worked hard to make this opportunity very beneficial to us. Our project is called Dalala. Dalala means broker in Amharic, which is the language spoken in Addis Ababa, where we want to start. In Addis, we see problems very similar to those just described, with an additional component of a very low level of internet connectivity. Dalala digitizes an analog job market and then brings this digital market to people who face this connectivity issue. It does this through a multi-platform solution, centered in a kiosk along with a web page and a mobile app. This kiosk is going to be located in strategic positions in the outskirts of the city where people who don't have reliable internet connection can go. The kiosk itself won't rely heavily on internet as it will store data there and have daily updates. Dalala is a social enterprise that has a revenue model based in small charges to the user, but also to the employer who's going to benefit very much from this idea that there's talent out there. There's talent already that the employers can't find. The search costs are huge not only for the job seekers, but also for the employers who are inundated with applications that are fairly irrelevant to the jobs they're posting. It's going to benefit both job seekers and employers by reducing those search costs, making the flow of information much easier, and we'll end up seeing a higher level of mutually beneficial hires in the labor market. In the long term, one of the great effects is this digitized platform will collect a huge amount of labor market data, right? Policies to address structural unemployment right now are kind of coming from good guesses, but this source of labor market data will make those policies much more effective. Dlala is an efficient, sustainable, and scalable solution through which we can tackle the urban unemployment in emerging economies going through structural transformation. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone, I'd just like to reiterate the message of the first two teams that we're thrilled to be here and very thankful to everyone who made it happen. Mrs. Clark made an interesting comment in her speech, which is that development should leave no one behind. And I think when thinking about how to prepare and frame our problem, we asked ourselves a similar question. And the question really took us to our own region of the Pacific for a couple of reasons. At 14.5%, the Pacific has the highest unemployment rate in the world. On top of that, it has the highest development finance gap, the gap between what it needs and what it has to meet the Sustainable Development Goals. We also know that many vulnerable island Pacific communities are already facing the impacts of climate change, and these are some of the most vulnerable countries in the world. And finally, because the Pacific has a small population spread over literally thousands of kilometres, we think it's often overlooked in global development discourses, and it simply doesn't have the option of following the mainstream development path that other countries have followed. So for a couple of reasons, the Pacific faces these problems of unemployment. It's isolated, it has a pristine natural environment that's not suited to industrialisation. But these same factors mean that it has a competitive advantage in the industry of tourism. To capitalise on this opportunity, the World Bank recommends that Pacific nations focus on Chinese tourists, cruise ships, and the luxury high-end market to really drive tourist growth in the Pacific. Whilst we have no doubt that these segments will definitely grow in the future, our concern is that growth in mass market tourism won't necessarily translate into inclusive, sustainable prosperity for all. This asymmetric growth is further exacerbated by the social and environmental costs of mass tourism, illegal development, pollution, deforestation, and the disruption of local cultures. Our research really showed that these negative side effects of tourism are much less likely in the presence of independent and community-managed tourism ventures. When operators are actually part of communities, they're much more likely to run their businesses in a way that creates the inclusive growth that everyone wants. Unfortunately, the Pacific is not structurally accommodating to small independent providers. Our solution, Network Effect, harnesses the opportunity presented by tourism growth to try and benefit local, underserved and underemployed Pacific Island communities. The solution involves a simple online platform complemented by a supporting program of work to expand and improve employment options and better facilitate all Pacific communities to capture the growing tourism market. Through Network Effect, small businesses and freelance service providers can connect with each other, cluster their tourism offerings, and collaborate to achieve economies of scale. The idea is that Network Effect staff will go into communities, partner with local actors, and try and identify opportunities for entrepreneurs to create new tourism offerings, to connect with each other and create clusters of offerings that are attractive. So combining tourism attractions, accommodation options, restaurants and transport links so that as a community, as a region, the Pacific Islands can really thrive. And finally, Network Effect is about enabling collaborations between tourism operators. So for instance, if you're in a small town and it's difficult to bring tourists from the main population centres, Network Effect will enable tourism providers to maybe come together and collectively buy a vehicle that can transport tourists from the major population centres to the regional areas and benefiting all operators and the entire region. Solving unemployment in disconnected regions is hard. Providing skills and training in the Pacific for non-existent or declining industries is similarly hard. Finally, direct employment through public works only succeeds so long as philanthropic dollars are flowing. Instead, our solution helps local communities create sustainable employment where they are by building on the natural advantage that the region already enjoys. It is one of the most beautiful and pristine locations in the world, rich with an enduring cultural heritage. This is all to build up to a simple insight which is at the heart of our model, and that is the importance of building on a community's strengths. Through network effect, we hope to transform the growth of the tourism industry in the Pacific from an opportunity for existing commercial incumbents to an opportunity for all, and transform economic growth into inclusive, sustainable, job-heavy prosperity. Thanks.
Now comes the moment that many of you have awaited impatiently. May I ask former Secretary General Kofi Annan to join me on the podium to announce the winners and hand over the awards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me assure you that I'm not here to impose another speech on you. We are at a critical stage and the moment all of us have been waiting for, to find out who the winners are. And I will start with the third prize. The third prize goes to Delala. The second prize goes to Network Effect. The men do the talking, but the prize goes to the women. And the first prize goes to Mbozu.
Thank you very much, Mr. Annan. And may I now give the floor to Professor Martina Villarengo the chair of the Academic Steering Committee, who is going to announce the topic of next year's contest. You have the floor.
Mrs. Clark, Mr. Annan, Ambassador Stalin, Professor Biran, dear students, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to announce that the 5th edition of the Advancing Development Goals contest will be on the challenges of climate change. Climate change is certainly one of the greatest challenges of our time. It is widely recognized that climate change is causing weather extremes and precipitating natural disasters. Low-income individuals in developing countries will feel this impact first and worst. This because of vulnerable geography and more limited ability to cope with severe weather and rising sea levels. Among the Sustainable Development Goals, the combat against climate change and its impacts is goal number 13. Moreover, the 2030 Agenda stressed that the adverse impacts of this global challenge undermine the ability of all countries to achieve sustainable development. Adapting to climate change and mitigating its impacts affects most, if not all, the other 16 goals. Yet, climate change and its effects on the environment have not often been at the top of political agendas. The Paris Agreement appears to be finally changing that. Its entry into force in November 2016 is moving the climate agenda forward. The next UN Climate Change Conference that will take place next month in Bonn will be presided over by the government of Fiji, a Pacific island state highly vulnerable to climate change. This is planned to be the next step for governments to implement the Paris Climate Change Agreement and accelerate the transformation to sustainable, resilient, and climate-safe development. The challenge today is to establish fruitful synergies between the public, non-profit, and business sectors in order to meet the goals and to ensure a broad political support. Being interdisciplinary is critical in addressing these pressing issues. We welcome submissions from teams of master students who are able to contribute from at least 2 disciplinary perspectives. Possible topics include, but are not limited to, the effects of climate change on food security and agriculture, the effect of climate change on health, mitigation and adaptation to climate change, climate-induced migration, displacement and environmental refugees, energy security, and the role of new technologies. Dear students, we look forward to receiving your project submissions next year. So, before we conclude, and on behalf of the Graduate Institute, I would like to thank our jury panel. This is a mix of representatives from international organizations, NGOs, and policymakers. The jury panel is chaired by Ambassador Stalin. It is composed by Azita Berar Awad, who serves as Director of the Employment Policy Department at the ILO, Maria Luisa Silva, Director of the UNDP office in Geneva, Mizan Rewan, co-founder and CEO of Wave K, an NGO that tackles youth unemployment in West Africa, and Florian Schaz, a development practitioner who currently serves as the technical advisor to the Director General of the National Anti-Corruption Office of Madagascar. Let me thank also my colleagues here at the Graduate Institute who are members of the Academic Steering Committee and have devoted much time and energy to this contest. These include Professor Graciela Moraes da Silva and Felipe Calvao, Professor Jean-Louis Arcan and Ugo Panizza, Director of the Center for Finance and Development here at the Graduate Institute, provided general support at different stages. Laurence Argara, Executive Assistant to Professor Burin, who also provided continuous support, and our project coordinators, Elif Kairan, Jaja Liu, Elena Mensch, the former PhD students here at the Institute, who have been dealing with the daily management and coordination of the contest in this last year, as well as the communication and public relations units of the Graduate Institute. Many others, of course, contributed to the contest, but we cannot thank all of them. Please join me in thanking all the participants, the jury members, and congratulating the winners.
Well, that's the end. I wanted to make one point. You know, I realized that when I made my presentation, I continued to say we, which was not meant to be the pluralis majestatis. It was meant to express and stress that the success of this contest is the work of a team. And thank you, Professor Villarenga, to give the names of all those. I don't repeat them, but they should know that we are very grateful to them, grateful to you, and very grateful also to our great and faithful patron, Mr. Kofi Annan. Thank you very much.